Hi, this is Sana Hashmi. I'm a fellow at Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. And this week in my Eye on China column, Prince Eye on China column, I explored the Chinese discourse on the visit of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to India. And I explored Chinese discourse on a number of issues, but of late, what I'm also realizing that there's a lot of discussion on India-China relations, India-US relations, and India is absolutely becoming one of the heated, most discussed topics on the Chinese internet. So the Chinese foreign minister is in India after 3 years, and this is his first visit in 3 years, and specifically after the differences in the relationship. So he was on a visit from August 18th to the 20th, and his main objective was to attend and participate in the 24th round of special representative talks for the border. But of course, there's much more to the visit. And specifically, if we look at the discourse, in the Chinese discourse, the visit and the recent developments in the India China relations are being projected as a sign of warming of ties in India and China relations. And for example, on Chinese microblogging website Weibo, there are a number of hashtags that were primarily crafted for Wang Yi's visit and India-China relationship. And one of the hashtags that actually attracted a lot of views, over a million views, was Wang Yi who will talk with Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar. So this all reflect that there is a strong domestic interest in how India-China relations are unfolding. And across Chinese strategic community, Wang's visit to India is interpreted as an evidence of a cautious thaw. So there is this consensus that there is a thaw in the relations now, and the social media narratives highlight India's alleged reiteration that Taiwan is part of China, a point that was mentioned in the Mandarin version of the Chinese readout, but of course, in the Indian readout, it was not mentioned. An Indian side came out with an explanation that um, India maintains relationship with Taiwan, and as China engages and attracts investment from Taiwan, this is what India has also been doing, and India would continue doing so. So, of course, this was something that was a discrepancy in the Indian and Chinese readout. So, in fact, but then of course, this was celebrated on the Chinese internet, perhaps primarily because this was aimed at the domestic audience. And in this context, one Weibo user wrote that this time India was finally forced to reiterate the one China policy, and Taiwan is part of China. Then, of course, this is also being seen from the perspective of the US and the US India rift. And in this context, one commentator framed this visit as a new script being written in Asia where there is no place for the United States. So, of course, US is always present, and this is something that is being discussed on a larger, wider scale in China as well. So, according to a scholar named Long Xingchuan, who's a director of the Center for Indian Studies in China, West Normal University, he opines that the ties between India and China have improved specifically since last year's BRIC summit in Kazan, where Prime Minister Modi met President Xi Jinping. And in the recent month, he argues that there is visible progress in the relationship. So, from Beijing's perspective, India's outreach does look pragmatic, and they believe that this is driven by trade tensions with Washington, slowing economic growth in India, and concerns over strategic isolation after the tariff war that was waged by Donald Trump. So, Chinese commentary is framing India's engagement as a balancing act in this fast, rapidly changing geopolitical scenario. So, in this context, the Quad is still dismissed as symbolic. And in fact, one commentator called it as India's psychological placebo. So, but despite that, the US, and then also there is this idea that US has been trying to draw India into this anti-China coalition. So now this is kind of backfiring in their perspective, and some Chinese analysts also emphasize that Trump policies as are escalators of rapprochement between India and China. Uh, So, of course, the tensions, the latest round of tensions between India and China are being projected as one of the major reasons for this reset, for this thaw in India China relationship. But there are a number of scholars who are actually saying that that the tension between India and the US are just secondary factors that are not the main catalyst in this thaw. And they believe that the work was being done for a very long time now. So one example is that of Qian Fang from Tsinghua University, who argues that the relations have their own momentum. There have been progress, there have been efforts to normalize ties, and he says that India and China have now met halfway. But of course, there's a lot of optimism. There is a lot of hope for a thaw in the relationship. But despite this widespread optimism, there are a few analysts who admit that border dispute management would remain the biggest challenge in how both sides navigate differences. In this context, Min Wang of Fudan University, he warns that while India wants to reduce military presence along the frontier, along the LSE, substantive agreement will be hard to reach here. And similarly, another scholar, Chang Jiaodang from Fudan University also, he points out that India's position remains constrained. There will be limitations where India will be and is still caught between domestic limitations and external partnership. And on WEPO, though the latest developments are turning into irony. So there is a mix of optimism as well as pessimism, and of course there is this a little bit of disrespect towards India as well, where they're showing that China has won and India is now flattering the Chinese side. So I would quote one user who said that the Chinese foreign minister seems to be giving orders to the Indian foreign minister, and then another commentator mocked India's position as flattery dressed up as diplomacy. So, but still, commentators stress that a thaw does not mean normalization. We do not really have to be happy as of now about how the India China relationship is going to pan out. And because, of course, the border dispute still lingers and this is not going to go anywhere. And then India continues to balance Washington and Beijing. And they also warn Beijing that China should not really be happy about the shift between India and US, because the relationship are also going to be normalized soon between India and the US. And then the practical issues like whether direct flights between India and China are actually going to be resumed next month, or if there are going to be tangible benefits out of this visit, it all remains uncertain. But Chinese narrative emphasize one constant theme. There is a consensus that there is a shift from confrontation to pragmatism in the India China relationship, as well as from both India and Chinese side. So, to sum it up, the Chinese discourse frames Wang's visit as cautious progress, cautious optimism, a chance to consolidate gains, and a sign of India recalibrating under external pressure. But for Beijing, from its vantage standpoint, the message is clear. After years of fence sitting and leaning towards the US and trying to be a part of this anti China coalition, India is now seen, at least in the Chinese eye, as extending an olive branch to China. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.